I think.
Take it away.
Cool. Well, hi. It's nice to meet a lot of you. I see some familiar names. I think we've worked in some of the Atmos security stuff together. So if you're one of those people, hello and thank you again for helping in the past.
It's good to see you again.
And maybe the future.
Yeah, I'm sure the future. But so I'm Jub with Legacy Fleet. I'm one of the trainers, one of their testers. We do a lot of in-game testing. That's our main focus, along with, shooting each other a lot. So I'm here. I talked to Ed a little bit, and we kind of came up that last week you guys shot each other, and we're practicing shooting.
Oh, you guys are already starting to lock me on. Sheesh.
Hey, hang on, everybody clear comms and let the instructor talk.
Thank you. So last week you guys practiced shooting each other. So this week we're going to practice not getting shot. So we're going to be talking about defensive flying a little bit. So in theory, with those powers combined, you guys can take on anyone, right? So so defensive flying is not binary, right? If I say fly so you don't get hit, you guys can all literally let go of your sticks, lift your hands in the air, and press W, and you guys will be the most defensive Star Citizen flyer ever, because you just won't get hit. Obviously, that's not what we're aiming for, right? Because if you do that, you abandon everyone you're with, and you pretty much just abandon the fight. But I guess if you're ever in a big ship, that is literally your best defensive option, and unfortunately, that's the state of the game as is. You just go. Because as soon as you get high speeds, you get desync, you get all these things that we're just gonna put that to the side and pretend you actually want to stay in the fight, right? I think that's a fair assumption.
Yes.
So with that being said, there's pretty much two things you can do defensively, right? As you know your mechanics and you kind of know your maneuvers. This is what we kind of go over with a lot of our recruits and stuff. And pretty much knowing the mechanics of Star Citizen and how they work, just like understanding them helps immensely with knowing just how to maneuver and build yourself in a way that makes you easier to, or harder to get hit. And then obvious maneuvers. And it's going to sound super fancy, but I guarantee most of you guys do this without even knowing. And I'm just going to put a word in that will let you think like, oh, if I do this, this is the like X equals Y in terms of benefits and, pros and cons. Some of you seasoned fighters might look at this and be like, oh, this is basic stuff. But practicing this stuff really is kind of building blocks that,
and making the basics second nature.
Yes, very much so.
Welcome, Kermondale.
So real quick, while we're in talk mode, I'm going to just go over some of the mechanics you kind of need to know. And some of this stuff you guys might very well understand, but it kind of helps you also frame how these things work. So the pip. Everyone knows what a pip is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so does anyone know how the pip now works as of 3.10? Like how it is calculated?
Probably not.
All right.
Like an estimation of where you're supposed to be based on velocity?
Kind of, yeah. So it changed in 3.10. In 3.10 or pre-3.10, the pip used to be your relative acceleration. So the game would assume whatever input you have, you will keep doing it. So pre-3.10, you'd see pips go crazy because people would throw afterburner to the left, afterburner back, afterburner to the right, like just go crazy. And the game would kind of lose its shit and the little pip would just spasm, right? It was very volatile. So after 3.10, they made it so it is not your relative acceleration, but just your current trajectory, right? So if you start zooming off into the distance, the pip will assume you're keeping that constant and where your ship is going. It's not going to assume that you're going to hold afterburner the whole time. So all this means is that is what obviously the people are aiming to hit you with. So by knowing that, you can kind of game it a little bit that your pip becomes harder to hit by just adding, as simple as this sounds, random maneuvers into it. So if you're going in a straight line, don't just go straight, but just throw strafes in, throw a little bit of roll in and all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense on the most basic level?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So besides the pip, obviously knowing your ship and your components is huge. If you're flying an arrow, you do not have the shield to tank, a Vanguard hitting you straight in the nose. So just having a basic understanding of what you're flying is really important to decide how you want to fly defensively. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit, but your basics. And then, okay, so strafing. Everyone knows I hope everyone knows what a strafe fight is, what people usually call most 6 degree of freedom fights.
Circle strafing?
Yeah, circle strafing.
Yeah, gladiuses.
Yeah, pretty much. Like light fighter meta is you spin around like a Beyblade and then you just hug each other until someone pops, right? So the big thing when you strafe, when you get into those circle strafes, and this is again something that most of you guys probably do, but you always want to strafe with your smallest cross section. So in most fighters, like a Defender, Gladius, an Arrow, that is your left and right. And the reason you want to do that is so when you're strafing into bullets, your smallest section is the one that's catching it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Smaller target equals less hitting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
It's just that's why the Cartual, that poor ship.
The flying starfish.
Yeah, it's literally its face just catches every bullet you throw at it. It's just not a fighter.
That's why it's called Scout.
Yes. So besides those mechanics, a big thing to also kind of remember is projectile speed, right? So if you aim perfectly, or if the opponent aims perfectly and shoots at your pip, that is not a guaranteed hit depending on range. Smaller ships, usually between size 1, size 3 guns, have a projectile speed that's usually sub like 1,200 meters per second. And what that means is most of the time that they shoot, there's usually a half second to a second before it hits you. And in that half second to a second, you move, right?
Mm-hmm.
So keeping that in mind, range is something that a lot of people will shoot at a target when the target is like 1,000 meters out, right? That seems pretty attainable.
Mm-hmm.
But 1,000 meters with most guns, that's a second to maneuver out of that stream of bullets.
Mm-hmm.
So with visual cues and stuff like that, just knowing your range, that's a great way to be defensive, right? Say you're holding out because you have a friend coming. You try to keep that range of 1,000. That person will keep shooting at you. They might land some shots, but that is not effective for them at all. You're keeping the engagement, but you're super, super defensive at that point. You will be taking minimal damage, if any. Also, mechanic-wise, this sounds obvious, but it's a real effort, a muscle memory you kind of got to work on, is always keep moving, right? So we have a tendency to you kind of just fly based on your target, right? You don't really look around at much. You're kind of flying relative to what you see. And it's really easy to let your speed kind of drop because, if the target's this way and you hit your sticks to go that way, a lot of people fly coupled and it'll kind of negate its own movement and kind of come to a stop. As soon as you slow down, you lose all the advantage of range, you lose all the advantage of projectile speeds, you lose the advantage of pips. All that stuff comes to a net zero because you were literally just a sitting duck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be working on also making the opponent or whoever's shooting you kind of come to that. But there's a big thing of when you're in a strafe, if someone flies over you closely, instead of just turning your nose to follow it, you really want to add movement, right? You always want to be moving. You never want to 100% counteract your speed. You always want to add some kind of movement, something to the vector, so that way you are not negating all the momentum you've built. Does that make sense?
Yes.
No sitting duck.
Yes. No. Again, it sounds very obvious, but if you pay attention to your speed limiter and see what some people do, you'll see yourself just accidentally bring yourself to 30 meters per second.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a small ship, that's plenty of time.
Do you advise flying decoupled most of the time when dogfighting?
I think you go either way, whatever you're comfortable with. I think comfort goes a long way.
So
I personally fly decoupled, but I do not. We have wonderful pilots who fly coupled. I think it's all preference.
more a matter of awareness and situational awareness, awareness
Yes,
of
very much.
your position and your speed and direction, etc.
Yeah, very much so.
I think a lot of the times, a lot of the problems I have is usually if I'm running the Sentinel, I always get surrounded by Gladiuses, and they just do circles around me, and it's pretty much end game at that point. I can't keep up with them.
So that's we'll kind of get into we'll get into that. That's like there are 3 maneuvers we're going to talk about, and we can kind of walk into it. There's only one thing I wanted to mention now with mechanics, which is new to 3.12. So as of this afternoon, now relevant, is now we drop countermeasures differently. I don't know if you guys saw in the patch notes.
Oh yes.
But you can now set how many countermeasures you drop.
Yep.
We at Legacy Fleet are currently testing to kind of isolate exactly. We got to break the system.
Oh,
right?
sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
Someone broke something.
Sorry, I was maneuvering and I hit you. Very sorry about that. I was not situationally aware there.
You, whoever has that talent, you might want to reconsider because you're just going to spin wherever.
I'll be all right for right now.
No, you lost half your thrusters.
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought I moved away from you. I was trying to look at Steve's yellow ship over there.
You're good. Well, I don't think I'll be doing a lot of watching here, so I'll figure it out when we
mostly
get started.
instructing.
Yeah. I'll just Beyblade in the meantime. But so with the new countermeasures, you have to set, you don't have to, but you set how many decoys you drop, right? And unfortunately, the defensive gameplay for missiles is literally you just drop more countermeasures than the missile is looking for you. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's any clear aha formula now. I can't tell you drop 4 countermeasures and you'll always be safe. No one knows that at this point. But that is definitely something, not today, I guess, but something to figure out.
There is something I want to try with the decoy system, with it and how it is now. Cutting your systems out just after you launch them.
Yeah, I don't think that works great. So we've done a lot of signature testing. When you turn off a ship, you will always have a base IR and EM, and it'll go down, but not fast enough. Missiles are going to hit you in probably about a second.
And you're going to lose all your maneuvering, all your thrust, all your shields. Everything's going to go out. I think
this is what I said after you launch the countermeasures, the decoys.
But then you're still a sitting duck, and you might be able to avoid the missile or two, but the enemy is still going to
guns are on you.
Still going to take you out. Mm-hmm. Yep. Glad you're making progress, Kermandale.
Yeah, and also, unfortunately, when it comes to turning off or launching one more countermeasure, it's probably easier just to launch one more countermeasure. Just a pad number.
Yep.
Just FYI, you're at 78% health there, Jordan.
Yeah.
He keeps bumping into people.
Well, now the first time it was Jack bumping into me, and then this time it was me bumping into Jubs.
Okay, you need a minimum safe distance.
So this is the problem when you're trying to instruct kindergartners on dogfighting combat.
Okay, so Jub, do we want to pair somebody off and let them fight for a bit and observe, or
I was gonna go over 3 quick maneuvers real quick.
Okay, go for it.
Which just kind of answers, I believe someone just talked about, with a Vanguard, right? Gladiuses usually just start, they get up your butt, and you're just kind of screwed, right? So there's 3 main maneuvers. There's a ton of maneuvers when you're in 3D space. Let's not get fancy, but there's really 3 building block maneuvers that I think everyone can use, and most of you probably do this already without knowing. And just by knowing when to pull what, it'll help you immensely, right? So the big 3 is pulling, pushing, and blow-throughs, which, again, sound very simple, because at the end of the day, they are very simple. We'll go down the list here. So pulling is referring to pulling range, right? So we know that projectiles have speeds. So if you pool range, even if you're in front of your target, their shots will have a higher chance of not hitting you, right? This is hard to do because it buys time, but in most situations, forward thrust is stronger than backwards thrust, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a Band-Aid fix. So if you're in a circle strafe with someone, right, you're holding your strafe, and you just pull back hard on your throttle, you will pool range, right? Mm-hmm. As soon as they realize that, they can push. But for that moment that you have that kind of advantage, you can pool enough range to then have them kind of come chasing out towards you. Does that make sense in theory, right? We'll show it here in a little bit.
It makes sense. What advantage does that give you in having them come towards you?
Right. So the big advantages for pooling is it minimizes the projectiles hitting you, right? So if we're assuming it's a Gladius, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of, let's say, the standard. They're using gimbal size 2, fixed size 3. At about 1,000 meters, that's a second until when they shoot and that bullet hits you. So that means if you, as long as you're not going in a straight line pretty much, as long as you're adding any other kind of variance to your motion, those bullets will not be hitting you.
Interesting. Okay. That's good information.
Yeah. Again, the downside to it, which is the danger, is that it's a temporary solution, right? And for small fighters, like, you just get pushed on. Now, for big fighters, like a Vanguard, if you're getting harassed by a bunch of Gladiuses, pooling lets you bring targets in front of you. So if you're in a slower ship, when you pool, because they have to come and kind of re-angle to come towards you, that is the chance that they usually will come in front of your nose, right? So if you just imagine you're in a car and you hit reverse and you pull back out of a driveway, mm-hmm. everything that was around you is now in front of you. Does that make sense?
Yep, that does make sense.
Perfect
sense. Cashew, I accepted your friend request for Toad Boomer, so Toad Boomer is going to try to join in on us.
And the big thing, the reason why the Vanguards right now are considered so strong is because their back thrust is strong enough that it can keep even something like an arrow in front of it. So you can just like pull so hard in a circle strafe that you can keep an arrow between the rotation of your nose and just pulling backwards. You can keep even the smallest fighters in front of you.
Oh, that does have massive retros on it.
Yeah, exactly. The Vanguards right now, personally, I think they're a little bit in the broken side in terms of balance, but their retros are so strong and their rotational values are so strong that if you just, pump the brakes and go backwards, as long as you're adding some strafe, you can keep most light fighters in front of you. So that's pooling. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And hello, Hufflepuff. Good to see you.
All right, and then this is going to be crazy and break your minds, but pushing is the opposite. Mm-hmm. So pushing is usually when you're in a more nimble fighter, because when you push, you thrust into your opponent, right, while you're in a circle strafe. And when you close the range, the more maneuverable ship will have the advantage. Mm-hmm. So if you're in an arrow and someone's in, let's even just say a defender, right, a relevant ship, the defender isn't as maneuverable as an arrow. So if the arrow pushes and gets on the side, that's what they were doing, again, whoever said in the Sentinel, getting surrounded by Gladiuses, is when they push in close, they can stay in your blind spot and you just end up spinning in circles, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is when people do that, because you're chasing with your nose, half the time you are countering your own momentum and thrust, and that starts slowing you down, right? And as soon as you start slowing down, your pip becomes less volatile, you become an easier target, and it's like a positive feedback loop where you just end up dead. So pushing is moving up the plane of motion, right? You are moving into the target. Pulling is moving away from the target. Pushing is great offensively as well. Like, I count it as defensive because if you're in a small fighter, that is your best way of not getting shot. But it is also your best way of getting shots on target, right? The closer you are, and as long as you're not taking shots, you're in a great place. You're a happy camper. It can greatly backfire. So this is the real big thing. Pushing is high risk, high reward. because you can get in close, you can be safe where you don't even take a bullet. But if you're an arrow fighting a vanguard and that vanguard somehow whips its nose around and gets you in its sights, you are not having a good day.
Yep. Kermidell, this is the Banu Defender.
So pushing, pulling, and then we're going to talk about blow-throughs. Does anyone know what a blow-through is before I even get into it?
Jousting?
Is that like jousting?
Jousting is when blow-throughs go bad. Okay, so jousting, unfortunately, is when a party blows through and then they spin 180 and they just do it again, right? That's usually a lot to do with like lack of speed control, chasing the reticle, and not really like a lot of awareness to it, right? So jousting is huge. I want to say it's a problem in the PU, because when you try to have a fight and people end up jousting, it feels like there's nothing you can do, right? So what a blow-through is, just base and simple, is a blow-through is when you fly through a target very closely, right? And you position yourself behind them, forcing them to spin around. So this can work with any ship, but you got to think, if you fly over someone, you can either then have the choice to turn around and continue the engagement, or just, blast off like Team Rocket. And that is, as we said, the ultimate defense. So blow-throughs is a great way of breaking engagement. If you are losing the fight, it's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. If you know you were losing the fight, you blow through. It gives you a moment of risk, but as soon as you pass through, if you do it correctly, you are just long gone before they can turn around and build momentum. And yeah, go ahead.
So you're essentially just thrusting directly towards them, and then to get past them.
Kind of. You don't go towards them. You actually go towards the pip. If you think of yourself like a giant bullet, you want to position your nose and try to aim of going towards the pip, because the pip is predicting, as we know, where the ship will be, right? So you don't want to aim at where the ship is now, because by the time you get there, the ship is going to be on your side. So you want to actually aim towards where the pip is, and you fly towards the pip. The pip will then get closer and closer to the ship as you get closer, and then you obviously don't want to hit the ship, and then you kind of overshoot it
and pretty much run.
Yes,
full afterburner.
Yes, this is the ultimate disengagement. There's very, very little someone can do if you do a proper blow through.
Yeah, because it gives you
it's like a blockade runner.
It gives you the most time, because they have to spend an enormous amount of time just turning around and trying to get back on target.
Right. And if you do it, and you guys are like, we're assuming circle strafes are kind of where everyone is. If you do it, they're not only having to turn around to follow you, but then they have to counter all of their momentum to start coming towards you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? We'll do some practicing. Yeah.
Yep.
So what's the best way to turn the blow through into an attack? I mean, once you get past them, do you decouple and spin towards them, or?
Not so. As soon as your TVI, so you kind of launch towards them, and pretty much as soon as you're getting within that like 100-meter range that you know that your like momentum will carry you, you start positioning yourself. You start spinning, right?
Oh,
so if you start spinning yourself
even past
first,
them. Interesting.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And that way you kind of, you just kind of pass, and then you're going to be landing, looking at them. And again, as long as you don't negate your momentum, which is hard to do, but you kind of always want to never go sub 100-ish. Mm-hmm. As long as you don't negate your momentum, you'll kind of just end up. Actually, can I post a picture somewhere in here that might help?
Yeah, and the multi-server chat, and then we can all see it. Then pull it up too.
It's essentially, you're pretty much planning your 2 moves in advance. You're pretty much lining yourself up where your opponent will be. Yeah. And then you're on their 6 while they're trying to figure out what's going on.
Okay, so this is an aerial view of a planar blow through, right? We know this is not how it works ideally, but this might give you a sense of why. This is the difference of aiming towards a ship and where it was versus aiming where the pip is. I just posted it in multi-server chat.
Yep.
Right.
I just pulled it up on the screen also.
So you see in the top one, if you just aim where the ship is, the ship will literally just follow you off into the distance. Mm-hmm. But if you aim to where it is and you pass like where it is going, that ship has to do a hard kind of stop and counter to then realign with you.
Which of those is chasing, the red or the blue?
The red is attacking the blue in this case, and the blue is doing the blow through.
Okay, got it. So the red is us in attack. So
yeah, so if you were attacking, you would be red. But if you're trying to do it defensively, you are blue. So the bottom blue is aiming. It is aiming to where the ship is going to go, which we can find out by the pip, right? Because the pip will always tell you where the ship is heading, the target that you have, where it's heading. So you shoot over that. And if you shoot through, it forces it to double back. But if you just kind of continue your orbit and go to where the ship was, by the time you get there, the ship is going to be moved. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Again, this seems complicated.
So,
we'll do a couple examples, and I think it'll feel a lot better.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If you're doing this maneuver, like I mean, this is a couple of times where I've been jumped unexpectedly, like in atmosphere, right? You're assuming the ships have equal handling profiles when you're doing something like this, or at least relatively close. Because there are some ships that just cannot keep up in atmosphere, where there are others like the Gladius that can pretty much smoke everyone.
Things with wings, essentially.
Yeah, and it comes down, unfortunately, like the bigger ships are just that's where it kind of goes back to point one, which is unfortunately a lot of times the best defensive option is just to hold W, right? You just blast off, because when you're in some bigger ships and Atmo and stuff, you're just like a fish in a barrel, you know. There's very little you can do.
Yeah. No one to pick your fights, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can add some stuff like rolls and kind of pip dancing, but like you're not going to pull a blow through in a caterpillar.
No.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff. Like once you get out of that medium ship range, and you're getting hit.
I guess the one of the main questions that a lot of folks are having here is like if they're in like a Vanguard or even a Mercury, something a little bit heavier, and they're getting attacked by, say, like a Gladius or something, a lighter, faster fighter.
Yeah. So in those kind of cases, when you're kind of within one class of another ship, you can usually pull this stuff off. I say usually because we all know like the Terrapin is a fucking piece of metal in the sky. Like you're not going to pull too much off. So
not much
with a grain of salt, that usually works. If it's within a class of you, you're okay.
Yeah, in my case, I was in a Star Runner leaving a planet with an arrow on me, and he was just outclassing me in every maneuver. There was no way to get out of it.
Yeah, Atmo is also a whole nother ballgame, because at this point, Atmo, you can't really maneuver in Atmo well, because we don't really have proper lift. We have like fake lift, but not real lift. Mm-hmm. So like everything you do in Atmo is just you're doing it through.
And no actual flight control surface.
He's letting the ship fight for him.
And your left turn signal's been on the whole fight.
And your landing gear's down.
No! Oh, there we go. Sorry, Steve.
Okay, just kill me. I can't do anything.
All right, we'll put you out of your misery there.
It actually ejected me right there at the end, too. Okay, I'll get one with that. I actually can't open and close like that.
Yeah, I think that those are a little bugged. Doing a good job of landing hits on me.
Yeah, that was a great blow through, by the way.
Whoa! Boom! Sorry, Jack.
It's all right. I really just wanted to test my strengths, so.
Yep.
You got revenge there, Druin.
Landed quite.
And you're undefeated.
So I think
it's all propaganda. Joran's been a pocket ace the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I think a little thing for both of you. Granted, I guess it worked out for Jaroon, so take it with a grain of salt. But it's keeping speeds up, right? So you guys kind of started a little slow, which is fine. But then I believe Jackknife, you were kind of dropping a little bit in some of the orbits. You kind of hit that peak of the ellipse, right? And you'd kind of just slow down to sub 50 or so. And that's when Jaroon was just lighting you up.
Yeah. So I don't know. when we collided or whatever that was during that desync, that took both my engines out. It was over.
Yeah,
After that.
that
Yeah, I
was
think-
probably my missile I shot at you.
Yeah, I think we hit each other. Whoops! I thought we weren't going to use missiles.
We
I'm
weren't.
just trying to end his life.
Yeah, I got
He's
tired of that.
suffering. He's just Beyblading.
Yeah. I have no engine control.
That's what I said. As soon as you lose those thrusters on top, you're done with the.
City back
power.
reading spawn there. Wow, yeah, it is much more maneuverable. Look at that thing go.
Whee!
Yeah, I put the patch notes in
Having a good time with that Connie
multiverse
now.
chat. It's just as it's almost right up there with the Cuddy Black.
Wow.
I kind of want to get mine back now.
I know. I was saying the same thing. I was like, I had the
This car is a very special one for me. It's my very first ship. I'm never
Your first
getting
ship.
her. This is my very first ship.
Started it all off.
Yep. And I'm going to keep it all the way through. I don't care if it's only a 3 or 6 month insurance. It's mine.